It was Christmas afternoon when Nathaniel Blackwood walked through his front door and heard something impossible. Laughter, real laughter, the kind that bubbles up from a child's belly when joy is so pure it can't be contained. The kind he thought died 18 months ago on Route 2 when a drunk driver ran a red light and took his wife before the ambulance could arrive. Nate stood frozen in the marble entryway of his Silicon Valley mansion. His briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. He didn't pick it up, couldn't move, because in 18 months, through 8 failed nannies and 7 desperate therapists and countless nights of screaming that shattered the darkness, he had never heard that sound. His sons, laughing. The sound drifted from the living room, warm and light and impossible, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, like hope when you'd forgotten what hope felt like. His heart hammered against his ribs. Each breath felt too shallow. He moved toward that sound like a man approaching a mirage in the desert, terrified that one wrong step would make it vanish into the air it came from. When he reached the doorway and looked inside, what he saw brought him to his knees. But this story doesn't start here. It starts 5 days earlier. 5 days that changed everything. Tuesday morning arrived the way every morning had arrived for 6 months. With destruction, glass shattered in the kitchen. Then another crash, sharper, closer the sound of ceramic meeting tile at a high velocity. Jasper's voice rang out commanding and cold. For a 3-year-old, shouting something that made what was left of the household staff wince and look away. Felix screamed in response, that high-pitched wail that used to make neighbors call the police, convinced someone was being murdered in the tech billionaire's mansion on the hill. Nate lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the morning light creep across the white paint. His body felt weighted down, limbs too heavy to move, like gravity had increased overnight just for him. This used to be when Kate would slip through the door with coffee, humming something soft while she poured her hair, still damp from the shower, smelling like lavender and vanilla. She'd kiss his forehead, make him smile before his feet touched the floor, make him believe the day ahead would be good. He reached across the mattress. The sheets on her side were cold, empty. 18 months and his hands still searched out air for her every morning, still expecting warmth and finding nothing. Downstairs, something else broke, louder this time, the sound of something heavy hitting the wall. He finally forced himself up, dressed in yesterday's shirt that he'd thrown over the chair, and descended the curved staircase like a man walking to his own execution. The kitchen looked like a war had been fought and lost. Cereal scattered across the granite countertops like casualties. Milk pooling on the imported Italian hardwood floors. Bowls abandoned wherever they'd been thrown or dropped or hurled in rage. Orange juice dripping steadily from the edge of the kitchen island, forming a small sticky puddle that would stain if he didn't clean it soon. He wouldn't clean it soon. And there next to the keys, someone had left behind in their hurry to escape, sat a folded piece of paper. Nate didn't need to read it. He already knew what it would say. He'd read 7 variations of the same letter over the past 6 weeks. For Blackwood, I'm so sorry. I tried. I really did. But I can't do this anymore. Your sons need more help than I can give them. Please don't contact me. Sarah. Or maybe Susan. Or Sandra. He couldn't remember anymore. They all blurred together after the first 5, their faces becoming interchangeable, their promises all the same, before they inevitably broke them. He opened the drawer beside the sink. The one that used to hold Kate's handwritten recipes cards with her looping script detailing how to make the boys' favorite meals, notes to herself about allergies and preferences. Now it held resignation letters. 8 of them, a drawer full of people who'd looked at his sons and decided that leaving was easier than staying, that their own peace of mind was worth more than 2 broken little boys who needed them. He placed the newest letter inside with the others, closed the drawer with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam, more final than rage. The twins were in the playroom, or what used to be a playroom before it became something else. Something darker, something that looked more like a battlefield than a place where children were supposed to play and learn and grow. Jasper sat on the demolished couch, arms crossed over his small chest, watching him with eyes too old for his face. Kate's eyes. That same shade of green that used to look at him with love, with joy, with the kind of warmth that made everything else in the world fade away. Now they looked at him with something colder, harder, like he'd already learned at 3 years old that people leave and love is temporary and trust is for fools. Felix stood by the bookshelf, pulling books down one by one, letting them hit the floor. The thick hardcover books made satisfying thuds that echoed through the room. The thin paperbacks just whispered as they fell. But he kept pulling, kept dropping, mechanical, empty, like he was trying to make the world as messy on the outside as it felt on the inside. She left, Jasper said. Not a question. A statement of fact, just another adult who'd promised to stay and then walked away. Nate nodded once, not trusting his voice. Good. Jasper's voice was flat as glass, devoid of emotion. She yelled too much anyway. Because you bit her, Jasper, on the arm, drew blood. But his son shrugged. No remorse, no guilt, no understanding that biting people was wrong. Just cold acceptance that this was how the world worked now. People came. People promised to stay. People made you hope just a little bit. And then people left. Better to make them leave fast than to get attached. Nate looked at them, really looked at them, Jasper with his mother's face, and a heart that had frozen solid the day Kate died, ice forming around it in self-protection. Felix with his own stubbornness, twisted into rage so deep he'd forgotten how to speak without screaming, how to interact without destroying. Two tiny boys who'd learned that love meant loss, so they'd stopped letting anyone close enough to hurt them again. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Work. A meeting in an hour. Another day of pretending he had his life together while his home crumbled around him, while his sons turned into strangers, while everything Kate had built fell apart. He grabbed his briefcase, kissed both boys on the head even though Jasper went rigid as stone, and Felix flinched away like the kiss burned. And he walked out the door into the cold December morning, leaving them with no one, because there was no one left to leave them with. That evening, when Nate pulled into his circular driveway, Marcus Wilson was waiting, his assistant, 28 years old, efficient, loyal. The look on Marcus's face made Nate's stomach drop before he'd even put the car in park. "Sir," the agency called. Nate's jaw tightened. He didn't get out of the car yet. "Let me guess, no one else will take the job. We're officially blacklisted." "Actually, they have someone." Marcus hesitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "But she's different." Different. Code word for desperate. Code word for last resort. Code word for someone with no other options who was willing to walk into a nightmare for a paycheck. "She's been working as a housekeeper for years." Marcus continued reading from his phone. "No formal childcare training, no psychology degree, no certifications or credentials of any kind." "Then why are they sending her?" Nate finally got out of the car, grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat. "What's the point?" Marcus looked down at the folder in his hands, manila and worn at the edges. "She heard about your situation, asked specifically for this position, said she understands what your sons are going through." Nate almost laughed. It came out as a bitter exhale instead. Everyone thought they understood until they met Jasper and Felix. Until they saw what grief could do to children who were too young to process death and too aware not to feel every ounce of the loss. Until they spent one night listening to screaming that didn't stop watching destruction that had no purpose except to externalize pain. "What's her name?" "Eleanor Thorne." Marcus handed over the folder. Nate opened it right there in the driveway, the December wind picking up around them. Standard application. Work history cleaning houses for wealthy families scattered throughout the Bay Area. References that called her reliable, trustworthy kind. Hardworking. Nothing special. Nothing that explained why someone with zero childcare experience would volunteer to walk into this particular disaster. Then Nate saw the photo clipped to the front page, and something made him stop, made him look closer. Her eyes. There was something in her eyes, something that looked like recognition, like she'd already seen the ending of a tragedy and lived through it. Raw grief that hadn't scabbed over yet. Fresh pain that still bled if you pressed too hard. The kind of sorrow you couldn't fake, couldn't put on for sympathy. The kind that lived in you. Sir, Marcus's voice pulled him back to the present. Should I schedule the interview? Nate stared at the photo. Eleanor Thorne, 28 years old according to the birth date on the application. Brown hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, no attempt to present herself as anything other than exactly what she was. Just a woman with haunted eyes who'd asked to work in a house where children were dying inside. Something wasn't adding up. The pieces didn't fit together. Yes, he heard himself say, still looking at those eyes in the photograph. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Marcus nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Sir, for what it's worth, I have a good feeling about this one. You had a good feeling about the last 3. I know, but this one's different. I can't explain it. After Marcus left, Nate stood in his driveway as the December wind picked up, staring at Eleanor Thorne's face in the photo. Housekeepers didn't look like that, didn't have eyes that carried that much weight, that much history. Didn't specifically request positions with traumatized children when they could work anywhere else for anyone else in any house where the job would be easier. Who was she? And why did looking at her photo make something in his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name, something that felt dangerously close to hope? The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Not a minute early, not a minute late. Punctual. Nate's stomach twisted. He'd barely slept, kept thinking about that photo, those eyes, the way they looked like they'd already read the last page of this story and knew how it ended. He'd spent hours in the dark trying to figure out why someone would volunteer for this, what possible reason she could have. He opened the door. Eleanor Thorne stood on his doorstep in a simple white blouse and dark pants. Both pressed carefully but worn soft from years of washing, the fabric thin at the elbows, the hem of the pants slightly frayed. She carried one small duffel bag, just one, and a leather-bound Bible that looked like it had been read so many times the cover was separating from the spine, the pages soft and thin as tissue paper. But it was her face that made him pause. She wasn't wearing that fake bright smile most people wore when they met him. That artificial cheerfulness that said, I can handle anything, before reality proved otherwise. Wasn't trying to look confident or put together or like she had all the answers. She just looked steady, calm, like she'd already made peace with whatever was about to happen, like she'd walked through fire before and knew she could survive it again. Mr. Blackwood, she said quietly. Her voice was softer than he'd expected, gentler, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. Come in. But she didn't move yet, just stood there, looking up at his house. Her eyes moved across the windows, the door, the stone steps with their dusting of morning frost, the evergreen wreath someone had hung weeks ago that was starting to brown at the edges, taking it all in, really seeing it, not looking at the size or the cost or the prestige, looking at something else, something deeper. Then she closed her eyes. Nate watched, confused, as her lips began moving. No sound came out, just silent words, her mouth forming shapes he couldn't decipher. Her hand rose slowly and pressed flat against her chest right over her heart. Her shoulders lifted with a deep breath, held it, released it slowly, like she was centering herself for battle. She was praying, right there on his doorstep. In the cold December air that smelled like pine needles and coming snow and wood smoke from someone's fireplace. Praying before she even stepped inside, praying like she knew she'd need strength she didn't have on her own. He didn't know what to do, where to look. Most people didn't pray anymore, at least not in his world. Not in Silicon Valley, where God was algorithms and faith was measured in market caps and stock prices, where the only thing people believed in was data and disruption and making the impossible possible through sheer force of will and venture capital. After a long moment that felt like an hour, Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked, not at his house or his wealth or his reputation or the tech empire he'd built from nothing. At him, at the man underneath the billionaire veneer, at the father who was failing, at the widower who was drowning. "I'm ready now," she said softly. She stepped inside. Nate led her through the marble foyer, past the curved staircase down the hall to his study, gestured to one of the leather chairs across from his mahogany desk, started to give his usual speech about the twins, the job, what to expect, the speech he'd given 8 times before to 8 different nannies who all eventually quit. But Eleanor spoke first. "Mr. Blackwood, can I ask you something before we begin?" He paused, settling into his own chair. "Of course. How did your wife die?" The question hit him square in the chest like a physical blow knocked the air from his lungs. Most people avoided it, danced around it, pretended not to know even though it had been in every newspaper from San Francisco to New York, every tech blog, every business journal. Silicon Valley mourns tech CEO's wife dies in tragic accident. "Car accident," Nate said. His voice came out flat, controlled, the way he'd practiced saying it 1,000 times. "Route 2, 18 months ago. The boys were barely 2 years old." Eleanor's face went very still. Something flickered behind her eyes. Pain, recognition, memory. Something deeper he couldn't identify, something that looked like her own ghost had just walked into the room. "And you've been carrying this alone since then?" Not a question, a statement of observed fact. Nate felt something crack in his chest, a fissure opening up in the wall he'd built so carefully. This woman he'd known for 30 seconds had just spoken the truth no one else dared to say, that he'd been drowning for 18 months and everyone was too polite to mention it, too uncomfortable to acknowledge it, too busy to notice. "I've tried everything," he heard himself admit. Words he'd never said out loud before, not to his therapist, not to his board, not to Marcus. Therapists, specialists, nannies with every credential imaginable, child psychologists with decades of experience. Nothing works. My sons are... He stopped, hated the words, but needed to say them, needed someone to understand. "They're destroying everything. 8 people have quit. Some lasted 3 days. One didn't make it past breakfast. I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to reach them. I don't know how to save them." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. The silence stretched but didn't feel uncomfortable. She wasn't rushing to fill it with platitudes or promises. Just thinking, really considering his words. Then she leaned forward slightly. Her eyes were so gentle it hurt to look at them, like staring into the sun, like looking at something too beautiful and too sad to bear. "Can I be honest with you, Mr. Blackwood? Please, God, please. I need honest. I don't think your sons are out of control," she said softly. "I think they're drowning, and drowning people fight the hardest against the hands trying to pull them up because they don't trust anyone anymore. They've learned that everyone eventually lets go. Everyone eventually disappears. So why grab the hand at all?" Nate stared at her. 6 therapists with PhDs and decades of experience and published papers and prestigious positions hadn't been able to articulate what this housekeeper just did in one sentence, hadn't been able to see what she saw instantly. "There's a difference between fixing and healing," Eleanor continued. Her voice stayed gentle but firm, like she was speaking truth that couldn't be argued with. "Fixing is about making things easier for us, making the screaming stop, making them behave, making them fit into the box we think they should fit into. Healing is about making things whole for them. And whole takes time. It takes patience. It takes someone willing to sit in the pain with them instead of trying to make it disappear, trying to speed past it, trying to convince them they should be okay when they're not." "I can give you 1 week," Nate said, his standard offer, his safety net, the only way he could protect himself from hoping too much. "To see if you can handle them," Eleanor smiled. But there was something sad in it, something that looked like she knew a secret he didn't like. She could see the future, and it made her heart hurt. "I don't need a week to know if I can handle them, Mr. Blackwood. I need a week to start earning their trust. That's all. Just the beginning. Before Nate could respond, a crash came from upstairs. Loud, deliberate. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then Felix's scream, the one that meant someone was about to get hurt or hurt themselves, trying the one that preceded destruction. Nate closed his eyes briefly. That's them. I know, Eleanor said quietly. She stood, smoothed her blouse, picked up her worn Bible, and held it like it was armor against what was coming, like it was a shield that I could protect her. Should we go meet them? You don't want to run first? Nate asked, half joking, half dead serious. Half hoping she'd stay, and half expecting her to leave before she even started, before she saw how bad it really was. She looked at him with those haunted eyes, the ones that had kept him awake, wondering what she'd lost to make them look like that, what pain she carried that matched his own. Mr. Blackwood, she said softly, I didn't come here to run. I came here to stay. And there's something about the way she said it, like she wasn't just talking about the job, like she was talking about something bigger, something he couldn't see yet, something that felt like destiny or purpose, or the hand of God moving pieces into place, made his heart start hammering in his chest. Who was this woman? And why did it feel like she'd been waiting her whole life to walk through his door? They walked toward the noise together. Each step closer, the sounds got worse. Crashing, screaming, the thud of something being thrown against a wall. The kind of chaos that makes your chest tight and your hands shake and your flight response scream at you to turn around and run. The playroom door stood open. Nate stopped at the threshold. He'd witnessed this scene before, 8 times. But it never got easier, never got less painful, never stopped feeling like looking at the ruins of everything he and Kate had tried to build. The room looked like a battlefield in the aftermath of war. Toys scattered everywhere, some broken beyond repair, some just abandoned mid-destruction, stuffing pulled out of teddy bears, plastic action figures with missing limbs. Books torn apart, pages ripped out and crumpled into balls, the colorful illustrations that Kate had loved now just trash on the floor. Curtains pulled down from the windows, the rod bent at an unnatural angle. A lamp knocked over the ceramic base shattered into pieces. Crayon marks on the cream-colored walls, spelling words he didn't want his 3-year-olds to know. Angry words, words about death and hate and wanting mama back. And in the center of it all, his sons. Jasper stood in front arms, crossed over his little chest, chin lifted in defiance. 3 years old, but already a general commanding his army of one. Felix stood beside him, fists clenched at his sides, ready to fight anything that moved, ready to attack before he could be attacked. They'd done this before, knew exactly what they were doing, showing the new person what they were walking into, waiting for the shock, the fear, the moment when the adult's face changed from confidence to horror, when they realized they'd made a terrible mistake coming here, when they understood that these children were too broken to fix. But Eleanor didn't gasp, didn't step back, didn't look at Nate for help or guidance or permission to leave. She just walked into that destroyed playroom. Slowly, carefully, looked at the torn books, the marker on the walls, the 2 small faces, daring her to judge them, to condemn them, to confirm what they already believed about themselves. And then she smiled. Not a fake smile, not nervous or forced or plastered on to hide fear. A real smile, warm and genuine and full of something that looked impossibly like understanding, like she just walked into something beautiful instead of something broken beyond repair. "What are you smiling at?" Jasper demanded. His voice was suspicious, sharp, defensive. "At you too," Eleanor said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We're not cute." Felix snapped his small hands, still clenched into fists. "We're horrible. Everyone says so. We heard them. The nannies talk. They say we're monsters, that we're broken, that nothing can fix us." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, considering them, really looking at them, not at the destruction around them, but at them. Then everyone must not be looking very closely. The twins exchanged confused glances. What kind of trick was this? What kind of game was she playing? Everyone else had come in with false confidence that crumbled within hours. What made her different? Then Eleanor did something that stopped them both cold, something none of the other nannies had done. She knelt down, got down on her knees on that messy floor, not caring about her pressed pants or the debris or the way it would look. She sank to their level, eye to eye, equal, not looking down at them but meeting them where they were. She looked at Jasper first, really looked, like she could see past the crossed arms and defensive stance to the scared little boy underneath the child who was terrified of being hurt again. Then at Felix, past the anger and clenched fists to the pain that made him want to hit everything, to the sorrow that had nowhere to go except out through violence. "You are not too much," Eleanor said quietly, each word deliberate, each word landing like truth they had never heard before. "You are not too broken, and you are not unlovable." The words hung in the air like a benediction, like a prayer, like something sacred entering a space that had been profane. Jasper's arms dropped slightly. His face shifted. Something flickered in those two old eyes, something that looked almost like hope, dangerous and terrifying and painful. "You don't know us," he whispered, his voice small and young and so desperately wanting to believe her. "Not yet," Eleanor agreed, her voice steady and sure. "But I'd like to, if you'll let me." Felix opened his mouth. Nate recognized it immediately. The pre-scream breath, the one that meant 6 hours of screaming, was about to start, the kind of screaming that made your ears ring and your soul hurt. The sound that had made 3 nannies quit on their first day, that had made one run out of the house in tears. But before the sound could rip from his throat, before the scream could start, Eleanor did something unexpected. She started humming, low, gentle, an old melody, the kind that sounds like safety and home, and someone's arms wrapped around you on a cold night telling you everything will be okay, even when you know it won't be, even when the world is ending, even when nothing makes sense anymore. She rose slowly, still humming, and began picking up toys one at a time. No rush, no urgency, no lecture about cleaning up or behaving better or being good boys, just a steady movement. And that soft, unafraid sound filling the broken room, filling the spaces where love used to be. Felix's mouth stayed open, but no scream came. The twins just stared, frozen in confusion, and something else, something they'd forgotten, existed. Interest, curiosity, a tiny spark of trust. Nobody had ever hummed before. Nobody had ever just started cleaning without yelling first, without demanding they help, without making them promise to be good, to be better, to be different than they were. "I think this room is messy," Eleanor said softly between notes. "Because your hearts are messy, and that's okay, that's completely okay. Messy hearts just need time and patience to heal, not punishment, not lectures, not people telling them to hurry up and be okay. Just time, just presence, just someone willing to sit with them in the mess." She picked up a stuffed lion, orange and worn, missing one ear from where Felix had torn it off in a rage a month ago. Felix's favorite since he was a baby. The one Kate used to read bedtime stories, to the one she'd hold up and make talk in a silly voice that made Felix giggle. Eleanor set it gently on the shelf, handling it like it was precious, like it mattered. "You knew our mama?" Felix asked suddenly. His voice was small, different, not angry anymore, just confused and hopeful and scared all at once, like a door had cracked open in his heart and he wasn't sure if he should slam it shut again. Eleanor's hands stopped moving, just for a beat, too long. A hesitation that spoke volumes. "I knew a lot about her," Eleanor said carefully, not looking at Nate, not looking at the boys, just focusing on the lion like it was the most important thing in the world. She sounded like an amazing person, wonderful, special. Nate's chest tightened. Something was wrong with that sentence. Not, "I heard she was amazing," but she sounded like past tense, like Eleanor had actually heard Kate talk, like they'd had conversations, like they'd known each other. But that was impossible. He'd never met any of Kate's friends named Eleanor. Kate had talked about a best friend once called her Ellie. Said she lived back in Boston, studying for her doctorate in child psychology. But they'd never met. Kate said Ellie was too busy with school to visit California, too buried in research and coursework, and trying to finish her degree. Before Nate could process this, before he could ask the questions forming in his mind, Jasper walked over to Eleanor, slowly, cautiously, reached out with one small hand and touched the hem of her cardigan, testing, seeing if she was real or just another person who'd disappear like smoke. Eleanor looked down and smiled, soft, real. "Hi, buddy." Jasper didn't answer, just held on. Like Eleanor was an anchor in a storm he'd been drowning in for 18 months, like she was solid ground when everything else was quicksand. And Nate stood there in the doorway watching his son, who hadn't let anyone touch him since Kate died, who flinched away from hugs and kisses and any show of affection, holding on to a stranger's sweater like his life depended on it. Who was Eleanor Thorne? And how did she know anything about Kate that afternoon? Nate watched from the kitchen doorway. He should have been working, had 17 unread emails sitting in his inbox, 3 conference calls he'd missed, a board presentation due tomorrow that he hadn't even started, slides that needed to be created, numbers that needed to be analyzed. But he couldn't look away, couldn't stop watching. Eleanor sat cross-legged on the floor with the twins, not forcing anything, not trying to make them play or talk or be okay or act normal, just present, just there, being with them in whatever state they were in. Jasper had crawled into her lap without being asked, without permission, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Felix sat close, their shoulders touching his head, resting against Eleanor's arm. His body finally relaxed instead of coiled tight with tension. They weren't talking, just sitting together in the quiet. The kind of quiet that feels safe instead of empty, full instead of void, peaceful instead of lonely. Then Eleanor started humming again. That same melody from earlier, soft, steady, the notes drifting through the house like smoke, like incense, like something holy. And Nate's blood went cold. That song, that was Kate's song, the one she hummed while making breakfast, while folding laundry, while giving the boys their bath. The one she sang to them when they were babies, when they couldn't sleep, when they were scared, her voice soft in the darkness. The one that died with her on Route 2 18 months ago. The one Nate hadn't heard since the morning of the accident. How do you know that song? His voice came out sharper than he'd intended. Harder, louder. Eleanor's humming cut off mid-note like a record scratching. She turned and Nate saw something flash across her face. Fear, guilt, panic. The look of someone caught in a lie. She stopped, started again. "It's just an old song. My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was little." But her eyes told a different story. She was lying. He could see it in the way she wouldn't quite meet his gaze, in the way her hands trembled slightly, in the way her breath came faster. "Lots of people know it," Eleanor added. Her voice was too casual now, too light, too forced, overcompensating. The twins didn't seem to notice, but Nate did. He noticed everything. Had learned to read people in boardrooms and negotiations, had built a career on seeing what others missed. "Boys, why don't you go play in the other room for a bit?" Nate said, keeping his eyes locked on Eleanor, not letting her look away. Jasper looked up at him confused. "But we're being good. We're not yelling or breaking things." "I know, buddy. You're doing great. I just need to talk to Eleanor for a minute. Adult stuff." Felix stood reluctantly. Jasper followed, glancing back at Eleanor like he was afraid she might disappear if they looked away for too long, like she might be gone when they returned. When they were gone, when their footsteps faded down the hall, Nate stepped fully into the room, closed the distance between them. "That song," he said quietly, controlled, using every ounce of restraint he had. "That was my wife's song. She sang it every morning, every night before bed. Her mother taught it to her when she was a little girl. It's not in any book. It's not on any recording. It's not something you just happen to know. It's not something your grandmother would have randomly sung." "How do you know it?" Eleanor stood slowly. Her hands were shaking visibly now. Mr. Blackwood, don't lie to me again, please. His voice broke on the last word. I can't take another lie. Not about this, not about her. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face was breaking apart, crumbling, the careful mask slipping to reveal raw pain underneath. I told you the truth, she said softly. My grandmother did sing it to me when I was young, but that's not the only place I heard it. Nate's heart was pounding now, blood rushing in his ears. Where else? Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it, looked away toward the window, unable to hold his gaze. I can't. I'm not ready to. Did you know Kate? The question hung between them, like smoke, like the ghost of his wife hovering in the space between their bodies. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Sheila didn't answer, but her silence said everything. Confirmation in the absence of denial. Oh my God, Nate whispered, his voice barely audible. You knew her? Please. Eleanor's voice cracked completely, breaking like glass. I came here to help your sons. That's all that matters right now. That's the only thing that should matter. That's not all that matters. Nate's voice rose despite his best efforts to control it, despite knowing the boys might hear. You lied to me. You stood in my house and pretended you didn't know my wife when you... What? How did you know her? Were you friends? Did you work together? Were you... I can't tell you yet. Why not? Because if I do, you'll send me away. Her voice broke completely, tears streaming down her face now. And your sons need me, please. They need me. I can see it. They're starting to trust. Don't make me leave when they're just starting to open up. The words hit Nate like a physical blow, knocked the anger right out of him. She was right. God help him, she was right. The twins had let her in. In 6 hours, Eleanor had accomplished what 8 professionals with years of training and certifications and experience couldn't do in 6 weeks. But she'd lied, and he had no idea what else she was hiding, what other secrets she carried, what other connections she had to his dead wife. 1 week, Nate said. His voice was cold now, distant, professional, businesslike. You have 1 week, but when it's over, when that week is done, you're going to tell me everything. Do you understand? Every single thing. No more lies, no more evasions, everything. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak through her tears, her whole body shaking. Eleanor, who you are, how you knew Kate, why you're really here, what you're hiding, all of it. I will. I promise. I swear to God I will. Nate turned to walk away, but her voice stopped him at the door, made him pause with his hand on the frame. Mr. Blackwood. He looked back without turning around, couldn't bear to face her fully. Your wife, Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking with emotion, with grief that sounded fresh. She talked about you all the time, about how much she loved you, about how lucky she felt to have found you, about how you were her person, her home, her everything, about how she'd never been happier than she was with you and the boys. Nate's throat closed up completely. You're talking like you knew her well. I did. Eleanor wiped her eyes with shaking hands. Better than you think, better than I should admit right now. Then why won't you tell me? Because I'm scared, she admitted, raw, honest, vulnerable. I'm scared you'll hate me when you know the truth. I'm scared you'll look at me the way I've looked at myself in the mirror every morning for 18 months. Like I'm the reason everything fell apart. Like I'm the one who destroyed your family. And before Nate could respond, before he could ask what the hell that meant, Jasper appeared in the doorway. His small voice was worried, fragile, afraid. Eleanor, are you leaving? Eleanor dropped to her knees immediately, faster than Nate had ever seen her move. Nobody. I'm staying. I promise. Promise. I promise with my whole heart I'm not going anywhere. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not for a whole week. Maybe longer if your daddy says it's okay. Jasper ran to her, wrapped his small arms around Eleanor's neck with a fierceness that made Nate's chest ache. And Nate watched this woman, this stranger who somehow wasn't a stranger, who knew his wife's song, who carried secrets about Kate, hold his son like she'd been doing it her whole life. Like she already knew exactly how tight Jasper needed to be held to feel safe. Like she'd learned it from someone who'd held these boys before. Like she'd learned it from Kate. Who was Eleanor Thorne? And what was she so afraid to tell him Nate couldn't sleep? Again. The third night in a row, maybe the fourth, he'd lost count. Kept replaying Eleanor's words in his head like a song stuck on repeat. She talked about you all the time. Past tense. Like Eleanor had sat with Kate over coffee or wine, had conversations with her. Long conversations. Intimate conversations. Knew her well enough to hear her talk about her husband, about her marriage, about her life. He got up at midnight. The house was dark and quiet, everyone else asleep or pretending to be. Then he heard movement downstairs, soft sounds drifting up through the ventilation system. He walked down slowly, carefully, avoiding the spots on the stairs that creaked. Found Eleanor in the kitchen, making tea, a ceramic mug, sitting on the counter, steam rising from the kettle. She had her back to him, humming that song again under her breath, barely audible but unmistakable. And Nate watched, really watched, the way she opened the cabinet on the left, not the right where most people kept dishes. The left, the specific cabinet where Kate always kept the boys' special plates, the ones with the painted animals that had been Kate's grandmother's, passed down through generations. Eleanor didn't hesitate, didn't search, didn't open the wrong cabinet first and then correct herself. Just reached up and pulled them down like she'd opened that cabinet every morning for years. Then she cut strawberries from the fridge, pulled them from the drawer where they'd been sitting. Small pieces, tiny, smaller than anyone would normally cut fruit for a 3-year-old. Because Felix had choked once when he was 2 and Kate never forgot. Never served whole strawberries again. Always cut them small, always watched when the boys ate them, paranoid about another choking incident. And when Eleanor arranged fruit on a plate, clearly planning tomorrow's breakfast, preparing in advance, she made them into shapes. A circle for Jasper, perfect and unbroken. A star for Felix, 5 points carefully arranged. Because Jasper only ate food arranged in circles, some quirk of his mind that made disorder intolerable. And Felix loved the stars had since he was a baby, would point at them in the sky and laugh. Small things, tiny details, things a housekeeper wouldn't know, things a stranger couldn't possibly guess, things you'd only know if someone told you, if someone who loved these boys shared their secrets with you. You know how they like their breakfast, Nate said from the doorway. Eleanor jumped, nearly dropped the knife, caught it at the last second, spun around, hand pressed to her chest, eyes wide. Mr. Blackwood, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry I couldn't sleep. I was just... You cut the strawberries small for Felix, Nate interrupted quietly, keeping his voice level despite the emotions churning in his gut. Because he chokes. Because he choked once when he was 2 and it terrified Kate, stayed with her, made her cautious, forever after. Eleanor's face went pale, color draining like water. I just thought it would be safer. And you arrange Jasper's food in circles and Felix's in stars because that's the only way they'll eat. Because Jasper needs order and Felix loves space and stars and anything that reminds him of nighttime when Kate used to take them outside to look at constellations. Eleanor set down the knife with trembling hands. Didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it. How long did you know my wife, Eleanor? She didn't answer. Just stood there with tears building in her eyes, making them shine in the dim kitchen light, making them look like glass about to shatter. Because you don't just know things about Kate. You know things about my sons. Private things, daily things, intimate things. Things I never told you. Things no one would know unless... Nate's voice cracked despite his control, despite his determination to stay calm. Unless they'd been here before. Unless Kate told them. Unless they were close. Very close. Unless they were... Please. Eleanor whispered the word barely audible. Not yet. I'm not ready. Richie, my sons are upstairs sleeping peacefully for the first time in 18 months. And I don't even know who you really are. I don't know why you're here. I don't know what you want. Eleanor wiped her eyes, roughly smearing tears across her cheeks. I'm someone who wants to help them heal. That's all. That's the only thing I want. That's not enough anymore. It has to be, for now. Please. Nate stepped closer, close enough to see the pain etched into every line of her face, the exhaustion, the grief that mirrored his own. Were you Kate's friend? Eleanor's breath hitched. She looked at him with so much pain in her eyes it was almost impossible to hold her gaze like looking directly into the sun. Yes, she finally whispered the word breaking as it left her lips. I was her friend. How close? Very close. The closest, like sisters. Then why lie? Why not tell me from the beginning? Why pretend you didn't know her when you walked through that door? Eleanor's tears fell freely, now dripping off her chin onto her shirt. Because I was afraid. I was terrified. I was afraid you wouldn't let me stay if you knew. Afraid you'd blame me. Afraid you'd see me the way I see myself in the mirror every single morning when I wake up. Knew what? Nate pressed gently, his voice softening despite himself. Blame you? For what? She shook her head, unable to speak, her whole body trembling. Eleanor, I need more time, she said desperately, her voice rising with panic. Your sons are just starting to trust me, just starting to let me in. If I tell you everything now and you send me away, it will destroy them. They'll think I abandoned them too. They'll think everyone leaves. They'll think they were right all along about the world. Please, just a few more days. 3 more days. Nate knew she was right. Hated it that she was right. Hated that she had leverage, that she could use his son's healing as a bargaining chip, even if she didn't mean it that way. 3 more days, he said, his voice cold now, businessman, cold negotiation cold. Then you tell me everything, and I mean everything. No more half-truths, no more evasions, no more careful word choices. Everything. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak through her tears, her chest heaving with sobs she was trying to hold back. Nate turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Didn't look back, just spoke into the quiet kitchen, into the space between them. Kate had a best friend. She called her Ellie. Talked about her sometimes, usually late at night when she couldn't sleep when she missed Boston. Said she was like a sister to her. Said they grew up together, went through everything together. But I never met her. Kate said Ellie was too busy with graduate school to visit California, too buried in research and dissertations, and trying to finish her degree. He heard Eleanor's sharp intake of breath, heard the sound of her sliding down to the floor, her back against the cabinet, heard her crying like someone who'd been holding it in for far too long, like a dam finally breaking, like 18 months of grief pouring out all at once. And Nate knew. He knew who she was, knew why she was here, knew what she was hiding. What he didn't know yet was why she'd stayed away for 18 months, and why she'd finally come back now. What had changed? What had finally brought her to his door? The morning broke, cold and grey clouds hanging low like a blanket, trying to smother the world. Nate woke with the feeling that something was about to break wide open, like standing on ice and hearing it crack beneath your feet. He found Eleanor in the kitchen already making coffee, the machine gurgling and steaming. Her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen. She'd clearly been crying both of the night, probably in her room, probably trying to be quiet so no one would hear. Morning, she said quietly, not meeting his gaze, focusing on the coffee like it was the most important thing in the world. Morning. They moved around each other in silence, a careful dance of people who'd said too much and not enough, who knew too much and not nearly enough. Then Nate's phone buzzed on the counter, the vibration loud in the quiet. He looked at the screen and felt his stomach drop, felt bile rise in his throat. What's wrong? Eleanor asked, seeing his face change, seeing whatever expression he couldn't hide. He turned the phone toward her without a word. A news article. The headline screamed across the top in bold black letters. Tech billionaire's new nanny sister died in same crash that killed his wife. The story was everywhere. Google News, Twitter trending, tech blogs, local San Francisco news sites. Someone had leaked it. dug into Eleanor's background and sold it to every outlet that would publish every journalist hungry for a story, every editor looking for clicks. Margaret, Nate said flatly, his voice hard. Has to be. She's the only one bitter enough to do this. The only one with enough motive. Margaret Grimsby, the housekeeper he'd fired 2 months ago for incompetence and for speaking to the press about his family after signing an NDA. She'd been with them for 12 years, thought that gave her immunity, thought she couldn't be touched. When he let her go, she threatened him, said he'd regret it, said he'd pay for humiliating her. Now she was making good on that threat. Eleanor sank into a chair, her face draining of color, going white as paper. This makes everything worse, doesn't it? For any custody issues. For Vivian will use it. Nate confirmed, already thinking 3 steps ahead, already seeing how this would play out in court. Kate's mother. Her lawyer will absolutely use this. They'll say you're unstable, that you came here to ease your guilt, not help the boys, that I'm exposing my sons to someone with unresolved trauma about their mother's death, that I'm using them as part of some sick grief therapy experiment. Maybe they're right, Eleanor whispered, her voice hollow. Maybe I am unstable. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Stop. Nate's voice was firm, harder than he meant it to be. You came here because Kate asked you to. I know that now. You came because you made a promise, because you love these boys even though you just met them. That's the truth. That's what matters. But the damage was spreading like wildfire, like gasoline on flames. By noon, 3 reporters had called the main house number, somehow getting past the gatehouse, somehow getting the private line. By afternoon, a news van sat outside the security gates, cameras pointed at the house like weapons, like they were under siege. Eleanor wanted to hide, to disappear like she had for 18 months after the accident, to pack her single bag and vanish before she made things worse, before she destroyed this family, the way she destroyed her own. But then Jasper found her sitting in the kitchen, head in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Eleanor, are you sad? Eleanor looked up, trying to smile, trying to be strong for him. Failing. She just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, unable to pretend anymore. Is it because people are saying mean things about you? How do you know that Daddy was on the phone with someone? We heard him yelling. He never yells. Jasper climbed into Eleanor's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he'd been doing it his whole life instead of just 2 days. But we know the truth. You're good. You make us feel safe. That's what matters. That's what Mama would say matters. That's what the truth is. Felix appeared in the doorway and joined them, wrapping his small arms around Eleanor from the side, squeezing tight. When kids at our old playgroup were mean to us after Mama died, when they said we were weird or scary, Mama said, people who don't know you can't hurt you. Only people you love have that power. So those reporters don't matter, because we love you and you love us, and that's what's real. Eleanor held them both close, these wise little souls, teaching her the lessons she needed most, giving her strength when she had none of her own. Your mama was very smart. Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with tears. The smartest person I ever knew. She was. Jasper agreed, his voice matter of fact. And she would want you to stay. We heard Daddy say, you were her best friend. That means your family. And family doesn't leave just because things get hard. Family stays. That's what family means. Eleanor buried her face in Jasper's hair and cried. But this time the tears felt different. Not just grief and guilt. Something else mixed in. Something that felt almost like healing, like maybe she could forgive herself someday, like maybe she deserved a second chance. That evening, Nate made a decision, called his PR team, issued a statement defending Eleanor, explaining her relationship with Kate, telling the truth before the media could twist it any further, before the narrative got away from them completely. The statement was simple and direct. Eleanor Thorne was Catherine Blackwood's closest friend. They were like sisters. When my wife died 18 months ago, I lost my partner. My sons lost their mother, and Eleanor lost someone she considered family. Eleanor came to our home not as a stranger, but as someone who loved Kate deeply and wants to honor her memory by caring for the family she left behind. Any suggestion otherwise is false malicious and motivated by personal vendettas rather than concern for my children's welfare. The story ran the next morning. Eleanor Thorne, the best friend who kept her promise. The tide began to turn. Public sentiment shifted like wind changing direction. People understood grief, understood loyalty, understood the bond between women who were sisters by choice rather than blood. But the real battle was still coming. The war hadn't even started yet, because that afternoon another car pulled up to the gates, a silver Mercedes, California plates, sleek and expensive and ominous. Vivian Ashford had arrived, and she was ready for war. Thursday afternoon, 3:15 p.m. Nate saw the Mercedes through the window and felt his entire body tense, every muscle coiling, like he was preparing for combat. He'd been expecting this, dreading it, but hoping he'd have more time to prepare, more time to build their defense. Vivian Ashford, Gates' mother, a woman who'd never forgiven him for taking her daughter away from Boston, away from family, away from everything she'd known, who'd blamed him for Kate's death from the moment it happened, had said at the funeral in front of everyone that if Kate had stayed in Boston where she belonged, where she was supposed to be, she'd still be alive. The doorbell rang, harsh, insistent. Nate answered it himself, didn't make her wait, didn't play games. Vivian stood on his doorstep in black. She always wore black now. Had been wearing it for 18 months, like she was in perpetual mourning, like she'd never take it off. 55 years old, but looked older, worn down by grief that had curdled into something harder, something that looked more like rage than sadness. Vivian, Nate said carefully, keeping his voice neutral. Nathaniel. Her voice was cold, clipped, each syllable sharp as glass. I'm here to see my grandsons. I assume you won't prevent a grandmother from seeing her own flesh and blood. Of course not. Come in. She swept past him into the house, her eyes already scanning, cataloging, finding fault. She'd always been good at that, finding the flaws, the cracks, the ways things weren't good enough, weren't up to her standards. Where are they? In the living room, with Eleanor. Vivian's head snapped toward him, her neck rigid with tension. The woman from the news, the one whose sister died with my daughter, you actually let her watch my grandsons. Eleanor was Kate's best friend. She loves them. I know exactly who she is, Nathaniel. I remember her from the funeral, standing in the very back, too guilty to even approach the family, too ashamed to offer condolences. Vivian's voice shook with barely contained rage. And now she's here, in my daughter's home, living in my daughter's house, with my daughter's children. Before Nate could respond, before he could try to explain, Vivian marched toward the living room like a general going into battle. Eleanor was sitting on the floor with Jasper and Felix. They were building something with blocks, a tower maybe, or a house. All three of them were laughing at something Felix had said, some joke, only they understood. They looked up when Vivian entered. The laughter died instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. Boys, Vivian said, her voice softening only slightly, only barely. Come give your grandmother a hug. Come here right now. Jasper and Felix exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Then, slowly, reluctantly, like they were walking toward punishment, they stood and walked over. Let Vivian hug them, wrap her arms around them tight. But their bodies were stiff, uncomfortable, unnatural. Vivian noticed immediately. Her face tightened, lips pressing into a thin line. And who is this? She looked at Eleanor with eyes like ice, like winter itself. Who exactly are you? Eleanor stood slowly, wiping her palms on her pants. I'm Eleanor Thorne, Mrs. Ashford. I work here. I'm helping care for the boys. Work here. Vivian's voice dripped with disdain, with contempt. As what exactly? What are your qualifications? I'm a housekeeper. I'm helping with general care. A housekeeper with no childcare credentials, watching my traumatized grandsons. watching two little boys who've been through more pain than most adults experience in a lifetime. Vivian turned to Nate, her eyes blazing. Have you completely lost your mind? Has grief made you insane? Eleanor was Kate's best friend, Nate repeated, keeping his voice steady. She understands what the boys are going through. She understands grief. She understands loss. She understands. Vivian's voice rose echoing off the walls. She's the reason they're traumatized. Her sister called my daughter that day, asked for a ride home. And Kate, being too kind for her own good, being unable to say no to anyone, said yes. And that decision killed her. That one decision ended everything. Eleanor flinched like she'd been struck, like Vivian had hit her physically. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't defend herself, didn't explain, didn't make excuses. Just stood there taking it, absorbing the blow, accepting the blame she'd been carrying for 18 months. I'm sorry. Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Ashford. I'm sorry every single day. Sorry. Vivian laughed, bitter and sharp as broken glass. Sorry doesn't bring my daughter back. Sorry doesn't give these children their mother. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. Sorry doesn't fix anything at all. Stop yelling at Eleanor, Jasper said suddenly, his small voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Clear, strong, protective. Vivian looked down at her grandson, surprised, shocked that he'd speak to her that way. Sweetheart, you don't understand. I do understand. Jasper said, his voice stronger now, fierce. You're being mean, and Eleanor is nice. She doesn't yell. She doesn't leave. She stays. That's what matters. That's what Mama would have wanted. Felix stepped up beside his brother, shoulder to shoulder, united front. We like Eleanor. She makes us feel safe. She tells us stories about Mama. Good stories that make us remember Mama being happy instead of just sad. Stories about when Mama was young and silly and made mistakes and laughed. Vivian's face crumpled, the anger melting into something else. Something that looked like her own pain. She looked at Nate with something like desperation in her eyes. You see, they're already too attached to her. This is unhealthy, dangerous. They need professional help, not someone playing at being their nanny out of guilt. Not someone using them to feel better about herself. I'm not playing, Eleanor said quietly, finding her voice. And I'm not here out of guilt. I'm here because I loved Kate. And I love these boys. That's the truth. You loved her. Vivian's voice shook, the whole foundation of her rage trembling. Then where were you for 18 months? Where were you when these children were screaming every night? When Nathaniel was going through 8 nannies in 6 weeks? When I was calling, begging for help? Where was all this love then? The question landed like a bomb in the center of the room. Eleanor's face went white as paper. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, nothing but a small sound of pain. That's what I thought, Vivian said coldly, triumphantly. She turned to Nate, dismissing Eleanor entirely. I'm calling Child Protective Services tomorrow morning. First thing. And my lawyer. This environment is not safe. These children need proper care from qualified professionals, not experiments in grief therapy by unqualified strangers who are trying to absolve their own guilt. Vivian, please. I've already spoken with Harold Grimsby. She continued, cutting him off. Harold, Margaret's husband. Of course, the revenge plot coming into focus. He's preparing papers for an emergency custody evaluation. You have until Monday to prove this household is stable and appropriate for children. If you can't, and I don't believe you can, I'll file for full emergency custody. I'll take them to Boston where they belong, where they should have been all along. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking on the marble floor, then paused. Looked back at Eleanor one more time, really looked at her, saw the tears, the pain, the genuine anguish. You may think you're helping, Vivian said quietly, her voice softer now, but no less cutting. But all you're doing is prolonging everyone's pain. Those boys need to move on from their mother, to heal properly, not to be reminded constantly of what they lost, of who they lost. They need to forget so they can heal. That's what real love would do. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam, more final than rage. The room stayed silent for a long moment, everyone frozen in place. Then, Eleanor sank onto the couch, her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. She couldn't hold back anymore. Jasper and Felix climbed up beside her immediately, instinctively, one on each side like bookends, not saying anything. Just there, small bodies pressed against hers like anchors, keeping her from drifting away. Nate stood in the doorway, his mind already racing 3 steps ahead, already seeing the battlefield, already knowing this would be the fight of his life. 3 days. Vivian had given them 3 days to prove this was working before she took his sons away, before she destroyed what was left of his family. And he had no idea how to fight a grieving grandmother with unlimited resources and a lawyer who had his own axe to grind his own reasons for wanting Nate to fail. "I should go," Eleanor said quietly, her voice muffled by her hands. "I'm making everything worse. This is my fault. If I leave, Vivian won't have grounds to—" "No," Jasper said fiercely, grabbing Eleanor's arm with both hands. "You can't leave. You promised." "But Mrs. Ashford is right. I don't have any credentials. I'm not qualified to—" "You're the only one who stayed," Felix interrupted, his voice small but determined. "Everyone else left. All of them. But you stayed. That makes you more qualified than anyone. That makes you the most qualified person in the world." Eleanor looked at Nate, her eyes asking a question. She couldn't voice, asking for permission, asking for guidance, asking if she should go. "You're not going anywhere," Nate said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Not if the boys want you here. Not if you're helping them heal. We'll figure this out." "But the custody hearing." "We'll figure it out," he repeated, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Together, all of us, as a family." But even as he said it, Nate felt the walls closing in, felt the trap tightening. Vivian had leverage. 8 failed nannies on record that any lawyer could use. No credentials for Eleanor that any judge would question. And Eleanor's connection to the accident gave Vivian ammunition she'd use without hesitation, without mercy. They had 3 days to prove a family was forming here. 3 days to show that healing was happening. 3 days before everything fell apart. Friday morning arrived with a tension thick enough to cut, heavy enough to suffocate. Today, Dr. Patricia Winters was coming. The child psychologist Vivian had hired to evaluate the household, to find every flaw, to build the case that would take Jasper and Felix away. Nate woke early, couldn't sleep past 5. Found Jasper and Felix standing in his bedroom doorway in the grey pre-dawn light, both wearing their small backpacks, both holding their favorite stuffed animals tied to their chests. His heart stopped, just stopped beating for several seconds. "Boys, what's going on? What are you doing?" Jasper's voice was calm, determined, too old for a 3-year-old, too wise, too aware. "We packed." "Packed for what? Where do you think you're going?" "If Dr. Winters says Eleanor has to leave, we're going with her. We already decided." The words hit Nate like a physical blow, like someone had punched him in the chest hard enough to crack ribs. "What no? You can't." "Yes, we can." Felix interrupted, his little face fierce, absolute, his jaw set in a way that reminded Nate of Kate. "Eleanor doesn't leave us, so we don't leave her. That's how it works. That's what family means." "We already decided," Jasper said, taking Felix's hand, fingers intertwining. "Family stays together. You taught us that, Daddy. When Mama died, you said family was the most important thing, that we stick together no matter what. So if you make Eleanor go, we go too." Nate looked at these 2 3-year-old boys, babies, toddlers who'd spent 18 months pushing everyone away, building walls so thick and so high nothing could penetrate them, attacking anyone who tried to get close. Now standing before him, backpacks on their small shoulders, stuffed animals, clutched tight, ready to leave everything they knew rather than lose the person who'd finally reached them, who'd finally broken through. It should have hurt. Should have felt like rejection. Should have felt like they were choosing her over him. But instead, Nate felt something else entirely coursing through him like electricity. Pride. pure overwhelming pride. His sons were finally fighting for someone, finally choosing to love instead of pushing love away, finally believing someone might actually stay, might actually be worth the risk of attachment. "Come here," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. They climbed onto his bed, backpacks still on, not willing to take them off, not willing to trust yet. Stuffed animals clutched tight like shields. "I'm not letting Eleanor go," Nate said firmly, looking each of them in the eye. "I'm fighting for her to stay, fighting with everything I have. For all of us to stay together. Do you understand? Do you believe me?" "Promise," Jasper whispered, his voice small and scared and so desperate to believe. "I promise with my whole heart, with everything I am." Felix studied his face with those sharp eyes he'd inherited from Kate, eyes that could see through lies, that could detect insincerity. "Then we'll unpack. But if you break your promise, Daddy, we're using these backpacks. And we know how to call a taxi now. We looked it up on your phone. It should have been funny. 3-year-olds threatening to run away, claiming they knew how to call taxis, acting like they could survive on their own. But Nate had never been more serious in his life, had never felt more respect for two tiny humans. "I won't break my promise," he said solemnly, holding out his pinky finger the way Kate used to do. "Eleanor is family now, and family doesn't leave. Ever. That's a rule, an unbreakable rule." The boys hooked their pinkies with his, but they didn't unpack the backpacks, just set them carefully by the door, just in case, just to be safe, because they'd learned the hard way that promises could be broken. Patricia Winters arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, not a minute early or late. Mid-50s gray hair, pulled into a severe bun, carrying an expensive leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was Vivian's weapon, hired to find every flaw, every crack, every reason why Nathaniel Blackwood was an unfit father, why these boys needed to be removed for their own safety. Eleanor answered the door, her hands shaking slightly. Nate heard their voices in the foyer. Professional, polite, the kind of politeness that hides knives, that precedes violence. "Mr. Blackwood," Dr. Winters said as she entered the study, as Nate stood from behind his desk. Her handshake was firm and cold, perfunctory. "Thank you for accommodating this evaluation on such short notice. I didn't have much choice, did I?" Her smile was thin as paper didn't reach her eyes. "No, I suppose you didn't." She pulled out forms and a recording device from her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "I'll need to speak with your sons, alone. It's a standard protocol for custody evaluations. Children often speak more freely without parental presence." Nate's jaw tightened, muscles jumping. "They're 3 years old, barely verbal. Old enough to express preferences, old enough to indicate whether they feel safe in their environment, old enough to show signs of neglect or abuse." Before Nate could respond, before he could object further, small footsteps sounded in the hallway like drumbeats. Jasper appeared in the doorway, Felix right behind him, like a shadow. Both boys wore matching shirts Eleanor had helped them pick out clean and pressed. Their hair was brushed, faces washed. They looked normal, healthy, nothing like the wild screaming children who destroyed 8 nannies' confidence in 6 weeks. "Are you the doctor, lady?" Jasper asked directly, no fear in his voice. "Doctor." Winters' face softened slightly, the professional mask slipping just enough to show something human underneath. "I am. My name is Dr. Winters. I'm here to talk to you boys about how things are going at home, about whether you feel safe and happy." "Okay," Jasper said simply, like this was normal, like he had adults asking him these questions all the time. Then he did something that made Nate's heart stutter in his chest. He reached back and took Eleanor's hand, pulled her forward slightly. "Can Eleanor come too? She helps us talk about hard things." "I'm afraid I need to speak with you alone, sweetheart. It helps children talk more honestly when adults they know aren't in the room listening, when they don't have to worry about hurting anyone's feelings." Jasper considered this seriously, his face scrunched in thought, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but I'm going to tell you the truth anyway. Eleanor taught us that telling the truth is always better than hiding, even when the truth is scary or hard. even when people might not like what you say. Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow, interest flickering in her eyes. Did she now? That's very wise advice. The evaluation lasted 2 hours that felt like 2 years. Nate paced in his study like a caged animal, wearing a path in the expensive rug. Eleanor sat in the kitchen, hands folded on the table, lips moving in silent prayer, her face pale as death. Neither of them knew what questions were being asked in that closed room. What innocent answers from 3-year-olds might be twisted into evidence against them. What words could be used as weapons. When Dr. Winters finally emerged, her face was unreadable, a professional mask back in place giving nothing away. "I'll have my preliminary report ready by Monday morning," she said to Nate at the door, tucking her briefcase under her arm, "for the hearing." And Nate couldn't keep the desperation from his voice. "What did you think? How are they? I don't discuss my findings before they're submitted to the court. I'm sure you understand." She paused, her hand on the doorknob, seemed to consider something. "Though I will say your sons are remarkably articulate for their age, very clear about what they want and need, very aware of their own emotions." She left before Nate could ask what that meant, before he could probe for more information. Jasper and Felix came running out the moment the door closed, the moment her car pulled away. "We did good, Daddy," Felix announced, proudly bouncing on his toes. "What did she ask you? Can you tell me?" "Lots of things," Jasper said, ticking them off on his fingers. "If we like living here, if we feel safe, if anyone hurts us or yells at us or scares us, if we're scared of anything, if we want to live somewhere else, if we love you, if we love Eleanor." "And what did you say?" Nate asked, kneeling down to their level. Jasper looked at him with those two old eyes that had seen too much, that carried too much weight. "The truth, that we love you, that Eleanor makes us feel safe, that we want to stay together as a family, that we don't want to live with Grandma Vivian because she cries when she looks at us and that makes us feel like we did something wrong just by existing, by looking like Mama." Nate pulled them both close, held them tight. Over their heads, over their small shoulders, he met Eleanor's eyes across the room. She looked terrified, looked like she was about to shatter into pieces. Because they both knew the truth that the boys didn't understand yet. What children want and what courts decide are often two very different things. Judges don't always listen to 3-year-olds, don't always believe that children know what's best for them. That evening the phone rang while they were trying to have dinner, trying to pretend everything was normal. Nate looked at the caller ID and felt ice form in his veins, spreading from his chest outward. "Vivian," he answered. "Put it on speaker so Eleanor could hear, so there would be no secrets." "Nathaniel." Vivian's voice was cold, triumphant, victory already in her tone. "Dr. Winters submitted her preliminary findings to Harold this afternoon, just as I expected." Nate's blood turned to ice, his hand gripping the phone so tight his knuckles went white. "What does it say?" "She's recommending a full custody evaluation, extended interviews over several weeks, home studies, psychological assessments for you and the children, complete investigation." Vivian paused for effect, let the words sink in like knives. "It means Monday's hearing is just the beginning. It means the court has serious concerns about your fitness as a parent. And it means you need to prepare yourself for the very real possibility that those boys deserve better than what you're currently providing." "Vivian." But the line was already dead, already silent. She'd said what she wanted to say. Nate stood there holding the phone, the dial tone buzzing in his ear, feeling the walls close in like a trash compactor. He'd built a tech empire from nothing, had taken companies public, negotiated billion-dollar deals, outmaneuvered competitors who tried to destroy him with everything they had. But he couldn't outmaneuver a grieving grandmother with unlimited resources and the court's sympathetic ear and a lawyer who wanted revenge. Eleanor found him an hour later, still standing in the same spot and staring at the wall, seeing nothing. "Nate," he turned slowly like moving through molasses. "She's going to win, Vivian. She's going to take them. I can see it happening and I can't stop it." "You don't know that, Doctor. Winters is recommending a full evaluation. That's not a good sign. That's not a everything's fine. That's a massive red flag waving in the judge's face. It means she found something. It means she has concerns. His voice started to crack the control, slipping. I'm going to lose them. I'm going to lose my sons because I couldn't figure out how to save them fast enough, couldn't fix them the way the world expects them to be fixed. Eleanor crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed his arms with surprising strength, made him look at her, made him focus. Listen to me. Those boys upstairs, they're healing. Actually healing, not just pretending. They're smiling. They're eating full meals. They're sleeping through the night. They're talking about their mother without breaking down, without destroying things. That's not nothing. That's everything. That's what matters. But I hired someone with no credentials. You hired someone who loves them. Eleanor interrupted fiercely, her voice rising with passion. Someone who shows up every single day. Someone who sits in their pain instead of trying to fix it, trying to rush them through grief. Someone who's teaching them that love doesn't end just because people die, that their mother's love is still real, even though she's gone. That matters more than any credential. That matters more than any degree hanging on a wall. It won't be enough for the court. It won't be enough for the judge. Then we make them see it, Eleanor said, her voice blazing now with determination, with fire. Monday at that hearing, we show them what family really means. Not credentials or degrees or perfect circumstances or checking boxes on some form, but people who choose each other, who stay when it's hard, who love when it hurts, who don't give up. Nate looked at her. This woman who'd walked into his disaster of a life 5 days ago and somehow made it bearable. Who'd kept a promise to a dead friend, who'd faced her own guilt and pain and fear to save 2 little boys she'd never met before. I don't want you to leave, he said quietly, the words coming from somewhere deep. After the hearing, whatever happens, I don't want you to leave. Can't imagine you leaving. Eleanor's breath caught her eyes going wide. What the boys need you, I need you. The words came out raw, honest, vulnerable, in a way he hadn't been since Kate died. You've become part of this family in 5 days. 5 days. And I can't imagine going back to what we were before you came. Can't imagine this house without you in it. Nate, I know it's complicated. I know we're still figuring everything out. I know there are things you haven't told me yet. But you've changed us, changed me, changed everything. And whatever happens Monday, I want you to know that. I need you to know that. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that caught the light. I'm not going anywhere. No matter what happens Monday, no matter what the court says, I made Kate a promise 18 months ago. I'm finally keeping it now. What was the promise? Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. She made me swear that if anything ever happened to her, I'd take care of her family. We were drinking wine one night, having one of those deep conversations you have when you think you have forever, when death is an abstract concept that happens to other people. And she said, Ellie, promise me if something happens to me, you'll love my family like I love them. You'll take care of them. And I laughed, told her not to be morbid, but she was serious. She made me swear. So I swore. Then 18 months ago when she died, I broke that promise. I stayed away because you couldn't face, the boys couldn't face what my one mistake had cost everyone. Couldn't face being in this house where she should still be living. Nate shook his head, reached out and took her hand. Eleanor. But I'm here now and I'm not leaving. Not because of guilt, not just because of a promise, but because I love those boys. Because I'm starting to believe that maybe Kate knew something I didn't. Maybe she knew that someday when you all needed someone the most, I'd finally be brave enough to show up. They stood there in the quiet study, the house settling around them, 2 broken people trying to piece each other back together, trying to build something new from the ruins of what was lost. And upstairs, Jasper had his ear pressed against the heating vent again, listening to every word through the ductwork, already planning what he and Felix would do. Because sometimes the smallest people fight the hardest battles. And these 2 little boys had already decided Eleanor was family. And family doesn't leave, not if they had anything to say about it. Saturday arrived quiet and cold the day before Christmas. The day before everything would change one way or another. The last day of peace before the storm. The boys want to decorate the tree today, Eleanor said softly over morning coffee steam rising between them. I found the Christmas boxes in the garage last night. If that's okay, if you're ready. Nate's chest tightened, old pain mixing with new hope. Those are Kate's decorations. I packed them away after she died. Couldn't look at them without falling apart. I know, but maybe it's time. Maybe the boys need to see that we can remember her without it destroying us every time. That memories can be sweet instead of just painful. They brought the boxes up together, carried them carefully like they held something precious and fragile. Set them in the living room where the bare tree stood waiting. Bought weeks ago out of obligation but never decorated because the act hurt too much, because touching those ornaments meant touching Kate's memory. Jasper and Felix came running when they heard the rustle of boxes opening the crinkle of tissue paper. Christmas decorations. Felix clapped his hands, actually smiling, his face bright. Eleanor knelt beside the first box, opened it like she was unwrapping treasure. Inside were ornaments wrapped in tissue paper like artifacts, each one precious, each one a memory, each one a piece of Kate that still existed in the world. This one, Eleanor said softly, pulling out a glass angel with the delicate gold wings that caught the light. Your mama bought the year you were born. She told me she hung it on the tree and prayed you'd always have angels watching over you, protecting you from harm. Jasper reached for it with gentle, reverent hands, like he understood it was sacred. Really, she prayed for us. Every single day, multiple times a day, she prayed for you before you were born and after and always. What about this one? Felix held up a wooden star, slightly crooked, clearly handmade, with paint that had dripped in places. That one your mama made herself when she was pregnant with you. See the wobbly edges, the paint marks. She said it wasn't perfect, but that's what made it special. She said perfect things don't need love. Imperfect things do. Broken things need love most of all. They spent the afternoon decorating together, the four of them working as a unit. Eleanor told stories about each ornament, some she knew from years of friendship with Kate, from hours of talking and sharing and being like sisters. Others she guessed at, invented, made the boys laugh with silly voices and imagined scenarios that might or might not be true. When they finished, the tree wasn't perfect. Ornaments clustered in some places where small hands could reach, sparse in others up high. The star sat slightly crooked on top because Felix had insisted on placing it himself, and Nate had lifted him just high enough to reach his small hands, shaking with the weight and importance of it. But it was the most beautiful thing Nate had seen in 18 months, because it was made with love, and love doesn't need to be perfect. That evening, after the boys were finally asleep after stories and songs and promises that Eleanor would still be there in the morning, Nate and Eleanor stood by the window watching snow begin to fall. Fat flakes drifting down like peace, like grace, like forgiveness. Tomorrow's Christmas, Eleanor said quietly, her breath fogging the glass. And Monday's the hearing that decides everything. Are you scared? Terrified? More scared than I've ever been of anything. Me too. Eleanor's reflection in the window showed tears tracking down her cheeks. I'm scared I've made everything worse instead of better. That coming here brought more pain than healing. That I should have stayed away. You saved us, Nate said firmly, turning to look at her directly instead of through glass. Don't you see that? Can't you see what you've done? 5 days ago, this house was a tomb, a mausoleum, a place where 3 people existed but didn't live. Now it's a home again. It's alive. 5 days isn't very long, maybe not long enough. Sometimes 5 days is enough to change everything. Sometimes 5 days is a lifetime. They stood in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that happens between people who understand each other without words. Snow falling outside. The crooked tree glowing softly behind them, casting warm light and long shadows. 2 broken people, learning that wholeness doesn't mean the cracks disappear, doesn't mean you go back to what you were before. It means you learn to live with the cracks, Learn to let light shine through them. Learn to make something new from the pieces. Kate would have liked you here, Nate said suddenly, the words surprising even him. With us, with the boys and me. She wouldn't have wanted us to be alone forever to stop living because she stopped living. She had too much love in her heart for that. Eleanor's tears fell harder, her shoulders shaking. How do you know? How can you be sure? Because I knew my wife. Knew her heart. She loved too big, too much, too completely to want her death to be the end of everyone else's life. She'd want the boys to have someone who understood them, who could teach them that their mother's love didn't die with her, that it just found new hands to hold them with, new arms to keep them safe. He reached out slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away, took Eleanor's hand. She didn't pull away, laced her fingers through his. Thank you, he whispered. For coming home, for being brave enough to walk through that door. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that felt natural and right, and like something they'd been doing for years instead of days. And they stood there, two people who'd lost everything, learning that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely packages, come when you've stopped hoping, come from directions you'd never think to look. Monday morning arrived too fast, time moving at impossible speed. The day of reckoning. Nate, dressed in his best suit, the navy one Kate always said made him look trustworthy, made him look like someone you'd want running your company or raising your children. Eleanor wore a simple navy dress she'd borrowed from a neighbor because all she owned were work clothes and one outfit for church. The boys stayed home with a temporary sitter that Marcus had vetted, thoroughly protected from what was about to happen in that courtroom, shielded from the adult war being waged over their future. The San Francisco family court building was cold and sterile, designed to be intimidating. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick like they were already dying. Hard benches designed to make you uncomfortable, to make waiting agonizing. The smell of old coffee, an older desperation, hanging in the air like fog. Vivian sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with Harold Grimsby, Margaret's husband, her weapon of revenge. She wore black, always black, her face set like stone. Margaret sat directly behind them, smug and satisfied, waiting to watch the man who'd fired her lose everything. Judge Catherine Morrison entered. 50-something with kind eyes that had seen too many broken families, too many children caught in adult wars, too many people using children as weapons against each other. This is a preliminary custody hearing, Judge Morrison began. Mrs. Vivian Ashford is petitioning for emergency custody. We'll hear from both parties. But Grimsby, Harold stood smoothly, confidently, began his case like he was prosecuting a capital crime. Like Nate was a danger to society. He presented evidence, methodically building his case brick by brick. The 8 resignation letters from nannies, each one more damning than the last. Written testimony from 3 of them, detailing the boys' violent behavior, biting, screaming, destroying property, making their lives hell. Photos of the destroyed playroom, the broken furniture, the crayon on walls, the chaos that looked like neglect. Then Margaret took the stand, lying through her teeth with practiced ease. I worked for Mr. Blackwood for 12 years, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue for effect. I loved those boys like they were my own grandchildren. But after Mrs. Blackwood died, everything fell apart. Bill Blackwood works 80, sometimes 90 hours a week. The children were left with strangers who couldn't control them, who were terrified of them. It broke my heart to witness their suffering. Dr. Winters testified next, her words clinical and devastating. The children are currently well adjusted and bonded. However, Miss Thorne has no credentials. The rapid attachment raises significant concerns about appropriate boundaries and professional distance. Additionally, Miss Thorne has unresolved trauma related to Mrs. Blackwood's death. Harold smiled like a shark. We request custody be transferred to Mrs. Ashford pending comprehensive evaluation. Judge Morrison looked at Nate. Your defense. James Holloway stood, called Nate first. 5 days ago, my sons were destroying everything, Nate said. Now they laugh, they eat, they sleep, they're healing because of Eleanor. But she has no credentials. Neither does love. And love is what they needed most. James called Eleanor. Harold attacked immediately. What are your qualifications? I don't have any formal qualifications. Then what makes you qualified to care for traumatized children? Because I understand grief. I know what it's like to lose everything. Because your sister died with Mrs. Blackwood. Yes, Eleanor said quietly. My sister Juliet was 16. Catherine was driving her home from dance class. I was supposed to pick her up, but I was late, working on my dissertation. Catherine offered to drive her, and at 5:40 p.m. a drunk driver ran a red light. They both died instantly, and I've lived every day since knowing that if I'd been on time, they'd both still be alive. The courtroom was silent. So when I heard Jasper and Felix were suffering, I knew I had to come, not to fix them, but because I understand what they're feeling. She looked at Vivian. Mrs. Ashford, you lost your daughter. I know that pain, but taking these boys from their father won't bring her back. Vivian was crying. Judge Morrison called the boys in. Jasper and Felix walked in, holding hands so small in that big room. Boys, do you know why you're here? Jasper nodded. Grandma Vivian wants us to live with her. How do you feel about that? We don't want to, Felix said. We love Grandma, but she cries when she looks at us. It makes us feel bad. Daddy and Eleanor make us remember Mama in happy ways, Jasper added. Eleanor says love doesn't die. It just finds new ways to stay. Jasper walked to Vivian, put his hand on her knee. Grandma, please don't take us from Daddy. Mama wouldn't want that. Vivian broke, hugging him tight. After recess, Harold tried again. But James had emails showing Margaret's conspiracy. Judge Morrison's face darkened. Mrs. and Mr. Grimsby, you're in contempt. I'm referring you to the state bar. She looked at Nate. Full custody remains with you. Beatrice Ashford has visitation twice monthly. Miss Thorne's role is approved pending background check. The gavel came down. Case closed. It was over. Outside, Vivian approached. I'm sorry. I just wanted to protect them. You can still see them, Nate said gently. Vivian hugged Eleanor. Will you tell them stories about her? Every day, Eleanor promised. Christmas afternoon, the moment that started this story, Nate walked through his door and heard laughter, real laughter. He stood in the doorway. Eleanor sat on the floor with Jasper and Felix, decorating, telling stories, laughing, pure joy. Jasper saw him. Daddy ran to him. Nate dropped to his knees, pulled them close, cried from happiness. That evening they visited Kate's grave, brought flowers. Hi Mama, Jasper said. We brought Eleanor. She's taking care of us. Eleanor added white roses. I kept my promise. Nate touched the stone. Thank you for sending her. The community center was packed. Eleanor received the Citizen Hero Award. I'm not a hero, Eleanor said in her speech. I'm someone who lost people she loved. But Jasper and Felix taught me that love doesn't end when people die. It just changes shape. The applause was deafening. Christmas Eve again. 1 year since Eleanor arrived. They decorated the tree together. Same ornaments, easier hands, lighter hearts. Did Mama really send you? Jasper asked. What do you think? I think she did. She saw we were sad and sent someone who knew how to help. Eleanor held them close. Nate watched. This family formed from broken pieces. This home alive again. He put his arm around Eleanor. She leaned into him. Merry Christmas. Outside snow fell. Inside 4 people who'd survived sat together. A family bound by choice. Jasper looked at the crooked star. Perfect things don't need love. Imperfect things do. We're pretty imperfect, Felix observed. That's okay because we have lots of love. Eleanor thought about that first day, walking up terrified, praying for courage. She thought she was coming to save Jasper and Felix, but they'd saved her too. Taught her that broken things can heal, that families are built by showing up, by staying, by choosing each other. Thank you, Nate whispered, for staying. Eleanor took his hand. Thank you for letting me. They sat as the boys dozed off. Eleanor sent a silent prayer upward. Thank you for loving them enough to bring me back. I'll keep your memory alive. In stories, in laughter, in the way these boys love. Rest easy, your sons are healing. And so am I. Snow continued falling, covering scars, making space for growth. Inside 4 hearts beat in rhythm. 4 people learning to be whole again. Not perfect, but together. Healing, loving. A family. And sometimes that's all the miracle you need. The lawyer's office was quiet. Nate sat beside Eleanor, hands intertwined. Everything is finalized, James said. As of today, Eleanor Ashford Thorne is the legal adoptive mother of Jasper and Felix Blackwood. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilled. Ashford, she whispered. But the judge allowed it, Nate explained. So the boys carry both legacies, Kate's and yours. That evening they told the boys. So Eleanor is officially our mom now, Jasper asked. If you want me to be, Eleanor said. I'll never replace your first mama, but I can be your second mama. Felix thought about it. Can we call you mommy like mommy but different? Eleanor laughed through tears. I would love that. That night, Nate and Eleanor stood on the porch. I never thought I'd love again, Nate admitted, after Kate. Udait, and now? Now I know love doesn't replace love. It adds to it. He kissed her softly. Kate knew, Eleanor said. She knew we'd find each other. Inside, Jasper woke briefly, looked out at his parents. Mommy and Daddy are happy, he whispered to Felix. Good, Mama would want them happy. And somewhere somehow Kate smiled too. Her sons were loved. Her husband had healed. Her best friend had found peace. Love hadn't ended when she died. It had just changed shape, just like she'd always known it would.